Well, first, I think this is obviously, it's welcome news. I mean, Pam Bondi has been orchestrating this White House cover-up. She's been completely incompetent, the most corrupt AG in the history of the United States. She has doxed survivors, released their information, has meddled in U.S. elections. And so I'm glad to see her go. And at the same time, she's set to appear before our committee in 2 weeks. And I want to remind the public and the president that the subpoena that we put in place, where all Democrats and some Republicans joined us, that subpoena doesn't say or specify whether she needs to be in her position currently to testify. It says we want to speak to Pam Bondi, whether she's the Attorney General or not. We've already checked with the lawyers. We've checked with the committee. She is set to be in front of the Oversight Committee in 2 weeks, and now she has an opportunity to come clean, tell the truth. Her boss isn't going to be Donald Trump anymore, and it's time to get to the bottom of why there's been this massive cover-up and why the other half of the files have yet to be released.
Congresswoman Nancy Mace is singing from your same songbook, but I'm curious whether or not you believe that Chairman Comer, there's going to be any effort to revisit the issuance of this subpoena.
So we're having those discussions. Look, actually, Chairman Comer, days after Pam Bondi had her fake hearing in front of Oversight, where she tried to set this strange hearing and briefing a couple of weeks ago, a few days after, Comer made it clear the subpoena still stands. He realizes that a subpoena that has already been issued can only be retracted by another vote of the Oversight Committee. He can't, on his own or with just Republicans, somehow retract that subpoena. And so it is in place. He would have to come before the full Oversight Committee made up of Democrats and Republicans, the same Republicans that voted for the subpoena, and ask for a repeal. That would be very hard to do. And quite frankly, if he moves forward with that, that is a huge cover-up. Why not hear from the AG or former AG on the Epstein files? We heard from former AG Bill Barr. There is precedent to hear from former attorneys general. And if Pam Bondi does not appear, I would be the first person to submit contempt charges against her, because she has right now in front of her a subpoena to appear on April 14th.
This is a very important distinction that you're making. And I think we should underscore, frankly, that the current Attorney General, Pam Bondi, herself said over the next month she is going to transition out. So she will be, this is from an ex-post today, over the next month, will be working tirelessly to transition the Office of Attorney General to what she calls the amazing Todd Blanche. And she goes on to talk about her private sector work. So for at least the next month, the month of April, Congressman, she will, in fact, be the Attorney General. So maybe some of these arguments that some of her allies are quietly making is a moot point. I want to read this to you from The Atlantic, because I think this goes to the point that the chairman was making in our little chit-chat at the top of the show. The president apparently believes that Bondi is failing to lock up his enemies because she isn't smart enough. He will eventually discover that Zeldin, or whoever replaces Bondi, also lacks the power to persuade juries to convict Trump enemies of imaginary crimes. And so the next attorney general will eventually transition to a new job at the Shield of the Americas, or a farm somewhere upstate where they can run and play. Trump did demote Kristi Noem as a special envoy of Western Hemisphere Security Initiative called the Shield of Americas. What is your take on this? Because it feels like the job description at the Department of Justice has now changed into this impossible, frankly, way to serve the president, which is also, frankly, I would argue what he's asking people to do is illegal, but that might just be me.
I mean, that's right. Look, I mean, the president wants a Department of Justice that goes after his political enemies, anyone that's wronged him, complete retribution. And I think what Pam Bondi has learned, Todd Blanche have learned, is that the courts and juries aren't going to fall into whatever kind of line Donald Trump wants them to fall into. And I think this is really clear in what you just read there from The Atlantic, is that whoever he puts in, they're going to face the exact same problems that Pam Bondi faced. You have the court system in this country that in many ways is standing strong against Donald Trump. You have juries that will not take cases. You have all of these directives that Donald Trump is putting out there, executive orders, whether it's on voting or whether it's on immigration rights, that are being rejected. And Pam Bondi can't prosecute these cases because she's laughed out of court. And Donald Trump does not understand that. And so it doesn't really matter who's put in. Donald Trump is going to continue to be controlling the Department of Justice. But as Democrats and as Americans, we've got to be committed to the same exact fight the same exact pushback that we gave Pam Bondi. We've got to do to whoever else is selected. Could be Todd Blanche. It could be a senator or two that's being mentioned. But at the end of the day, we've got to stand on justice, focus on the survivors, and focus on getting the truth and transparency.
So, Congressman, let's play the Russian roulette of who could sit in the chair to mix an idea there. That you've got Lee Zeldin, I guess, is the main individual that everyone seems to be talking about, or at least buzzing about in Washington. Certainly, a few names have popped up, Senator Mike Lee and a few others for a number of reasons. Zeldin, though, presents an interesting pick, should that come to pass, simply because of his sycophantic, lockstep, right up Trump's shadow in terms of the 2020 election, the election denying. You've got Politico noting from the 2020 election vote. Zeldin took to the House floor after the violent insurrection at the Capitol on January 6 to object to the certification of the 2020 presidential election results, citing what he called evidence-filled issues with the elections administration. There is no evidence of widespread fraud during the 2020 presidential election, and nor has Lee Zeldin produced 1 ounce, 1 inch, a centimeter of evidence that there was a fraud in the election. And yet he's now in a position to run this department. How will you dance with him, sir?
Well, I mean, first, he and Trump are actually very close. I mean, they're very good friends. Zeldin is a complete election denier. He'll do whatever Donald Trump wants him to do. Look, I hope that the Senate stands strong. It's been a shame to watch so many senators cave and vote for some of these nominees. I mean, give me a break. There should be 0 votes for whoever Donald Trump puts up, because at the end of the day, that person is going to be not held accountable by Donald Trump, and will do everything that he wants him to do, to go after enemies, to ruin the DOJ, to go after the courts. And so we've got to stand strong and continue to push back. And I would hope that there's some senators that realize that what we need is an independent AG, or someone that actually has respect in both chambers. And it ain't going to be Lee Zeldin, and certainly not going to be some of the other names like Jean Pirro and some of the others. I mean, these folks are loyal only to Donald Trump, not the Constitution.
They're loyal to Donald Trump, but now we're finding out that no matter how loyal you are, it is not loyal enough. I want to read this statement from Annie Farmer, who, of course, is one of the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein's abuse. This was her statement in reaction to the news today about the AG. She writes, "This is not about a single person. It is about a government and judicial system that has repeatedly failed Epstein survivors. Regardless of who holds power, survivors deserve accountability, transparency, protection from retaliation, and assurance that those who enabled Epstein, Maxwell, and others will be investigated and, if appropriate, prosecuted." In addition to the way that Pam Bondi has handled the release of the Epstein files, there's just been the sheer callousness with which she has treated these survivors, most notable, of course, at that congressional hearing, where she couldn't even look at them. She couldn't speak to them. Yeah. I wonder today, have you spoken with survivors, and what does this moment mean to them?
I haven't. Actually, it's interesting you put up Annie. Annie and I communicated earlier today after the news was out. I think something that she has said in the statement and has said to me and others is obviously this is a moment that we're focused on Pam Bondi, but it's a lot bigger than that. It's about the corruption of the DOJ. It's about Pam Bondi and the way that she has treated the survivors and the way the DOJ has treated the survivors. Not only could she not look at them in that hearing, but I'm still disgusted by the way that Todd Blanche, the FBI, the DOJ have all actually handled the materials. These survivors in some cases have been doxxed. These survivors have been exposed. Intimate photographs have been released to the public. The names of survivors, which should have been redacted, were out in the public. Their families have been put in danger. And not once did Pam Bondi or Todd Blanche or anyone else invite the survivors in to meet with them, to discuss issues with them, to actually look them in the eye in the same hearing room. And I think the frustration that you hear from Annie and other survivors is also just the human decency. Where is the respect of these women who, by the way, are nonpartisan, who come from all ends of the political spectrum? Where's the respect to actually listen to their stories, to work with them, to actually get some justice. And I think that, unfortunately, Pam Bondi's legacy, in large part, is going to be the way she disrespected and treated these women.